America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Jordan Bruneau, Vice President of the Job Creators Network. Today we're speaking with David Bahnsen. David is the Chief Investment Officer of the Bahnsen Group. Today he joins us to talk about the government shutdown and the economic effects or lack thereof of it. David, welcome back to Main Street Matters.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Good to be with you.
So, David, as we're recording, it looks like we might be finally having a deal to end the shutdown. What are your thoughts on this last month, the shutdown, and any economic or financial effects that you've seen?
I don't think that there's been any substantive economic effects. I don't think that the way that these things generally go allow for really deteriorative economic impact. I think that they're mostly undermining of public trust, the credibility of government. It speaks to a certain dysfunction that has a social and political impact. But for the most part, these things end up getting resolved before real economic damage is done. That's different than saying it doesn't have any impact to anyone, but at a macro level, I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're on the ground with a lot of Main Street businesses, and we've been asked sometimes to find Main Street businesses who are feeling the pain. As you can imagine, it has actually not been as easy as anyone might think. I've talked to dozens and dozens who say, I've even had small businesses say, oh, actually, it's been good. No more OSHA inspections. We have had a few hoteliers in the DC area who have had an impact, but by and large, that's exactly what we're hearing from our Main Street small businesses as well. Kind of a DC story, but not a broader American story. Is that a little bit how you see it?
It is, and it's basically how these things have always gone in the past as well. It's funny. It's not merely in a lot of the surveys that you see what you're running into, which is people saying that they haven't seen an impact, and sometimes they might even consider it, marginally beneficial. Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot that don't even know it's happening. That there's so many small businesses out there that are just focused on their day-to-day work, getting up and doing what they do. They're not in a shutdown. They don't have the luxury of these kinds of political theatrics. And so a lot of times they're not even aware of it, let alone impacted by it.
Right. So we're also talking the week after the elections, the off-year elections, and we saw Democrats do a lot better than a lot of us had thought. What are your thoughts on, what's to explain for that Democratic outperformance? And is it the affordability and economic issues that the press is saying?
Well, I don't agree that it was more than we thought, but I guess everybody might have been thinking something different. First of all, it isn't like this was a midterm. This was three elections in three blue states. And I don't have any data that tells me that the people are generally pleased with what's going on. And when generally unpleased, it's the incumbent party that feels the brunt of that. And that incumbent party right now is the Republican Party, from the White House to the House of Representatives to the Senate. Now, you combine that with the fact that it was a cluster of a mayoral race in New York, with the primary going the way it went, and then the independent candidate being the very Democratic primary opponent who had himself lost, who had lost the governor's mansion in disgrace, and then a Republican candidate that was a sideshow with less than 15% registration. That whole thing was a complete debacle, and in fact, underperformed relative to what what percentage successful mayors have gotten. It was actually an underperformance for Mamdani in New York. Now, the Virginia governor race and New Jersey governor race, I think Republicans need to be a little more honest about believing their own hype going in. There were never any polls that said that they were going to win either race. There were a couple polls that indicated the New Jersey race being tighter than expected. But the president right now is dealing with very, very low approval ratings, and those are blue states. And so this has been a trend since President Trump first came down the escalator. He's outperformed in any race he's been in, twice in victory, once in failure, but still, even in that failure, outperforming expectation. And in any race he isn't on the ticket for, the party has underperformed substantially. And this is very similar, by the way, to President Obama, where he was very good at winning races and very bad at helping others win races.
Right.
So I think the Republicans have about a year till the midterms that matter to see if they get economic messaging. I personally am confused how Republicans are going to say it's wrong for the Democrats to say they want to start grocery stores when the Republicans want to take equity and Intel.
Right.
The pro market message is not being advocated by either party, and populism sometimes comes down to a popularity contest of the messenger, and
Mhm.
that could get tricky for the Republicans.
Right. So, what would you say from your view of the economy right now should be some key focuses for conservatives and Republicans to make over the next year?
Well, a lot of it's going to, of course, depend on the substance of the data. If the economic data is difficult, if the job market is deteriorating, it's going to be really, really challenging for Republicans. They've come in. You brought up affordability before. You're exactly right. The media has made a big narrative there for good reason. The challenge there is Republicans are very successful in pinning the affordability issue on President Biden, and now they have to own it. And it isn't as easy for politicians to bring prices down as we want to say or pretend. And when you go with that messianic view of politics, that a politician can just lo and behold make prices lower, what happens is that when you're in charge and held accountable to it, you end up doing desperate things that are counterproductive. So, Vice President Harris saying when she was a candidate for president that she was going to solve for housing affordability by giving people down payment money. President Trump saying he's going to solve for it by a government sanctioned 50-year mortgage. These are not solutions that work. And yet
Mhm.
they're what happens when politicians feel like, oh, I have to do something to make things more affordable. This is where conservatives have to get serious about believing in their own philosophy of government and philosophy of economic policy, that you get lower prices through competition and through greater supply, through greater production, removing impediments to production, not manipulating financing, and not by demonizing beef producers and saying you're gouging for profits. That's what Elizabeth Warren does. That's what Bernie
Yeah.
Sanders does. Blame the oil companies for the price of oil and other silly things like that. What we have to do is get serious about our own belief system, because those things will work, and that we have time to do that before the midterms. But affordability will be a big issue, and so will the jobs market.
hmm And what about on healthcare? I mean, we saw that was the reason for this shutdown. I mean, obviously that's such a crisis right now. The latest data I see is about $27,000 per family plan per year. I mean, it's just not working for our small businesses. How do you feel that we can fix that crisis?
Well, it doesn't matter how I think we can fix it, because we're not going to do what I think. So the question is what they do
Mm-hmm.
within the mess of a situation they've made. There's nobody, Republican, Democrat, the president, the left, the right, nobody saying, let's go blow up the Affordable Care Act and start over and start looking at market-based solutions to healthcare. There's just
Right.
absolutely nobody talking about that. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, what I think will happen is that the subsidies we extended in the Affordable Care Act out of COVID are going to be extended. There will be a few Republicans that stand up and fight against it, but it's unpopular to take away subsidies. And
Right.
this is why Milton Friedman told us that there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. So the mess was not made in 2025 when they extend the subsidy. The mess was made in 2021 when they gave it to begin with.
Uh-huh.
You can't, in politics, in democratic politics, give candy and then take it away. It just doesn't work. So the voters have now gotten used to this extra amount. And to your point, what we've never done is actually address the cost of healthcare. How do we push those prices down? They're resulting in $27,000 premium costs. Remember, the insurance is not the price of healthcare. That's the mechanism by which the healthcare is paid for via insurance system. And because of subsidies, it pushes the premium prices higher. But why don't we actually go about solving for the underlying price of healthcare by removing impediments, by increasing competition, by increasing transparency? These are
Amen.
solutions that we do in every other aspect of the economy, and we've abandoned them in healthcare. And then it is so complicated and so understandably emotional and personal
Mhm.
and messy that trying to go touch it and turn economic knobs on it the way that someone who's trying to be more principle or philosophically driven like I am, it doesn't work politically. So we have a real mess on our hand that we have to accept is going to take a long time to get out of. In the short term, someone has to do the unpopular thing of winning the argument here. That we're
Yeah.
not taking away something from someone, that these were temporary extensions that are unaffordable, and we simply cannot allow emergency subsidies to continue in a non-emergency period. But that argument has 0% chance of being popular with the American public.
Yeah, no, that's great points, and I love the philosophical reference to like what can be done in a democracy. What I'm hearing from a lot of small businesses is they're still struggling to find manpower and work. You've written a lot on this before. Can you just give the overview of your message on this and why you think there's so few good applicants for jobs out there, qualified applicants?
Well, I believe fundamentally the number one biggest problem, there's more than one explanation. There's a lot of things that are kind of in the stew here that we have to kind of stir up a bit. But yeah, the biggest issue is able-bodied prime working age men and their voluntary removal from the labor force. And we see that there is a cultural crisis that is commiserate with substitute methods of people making a living. With the massive increase in disability claims, massive increase in public benefits, and so there's been all at once a sort of social and cultural acceptance of people extending adolescence and delaying productive participation in the workforce. And then there are other economic issues that contribute too. There are places where it's hard to get a job. There's not very many. There are definitely significant areas where certain jobs have become obsolete, and that's going to intensify. And so there is a need for more dynamism and more mobility and more training and more vocational preparation. And I think that we are delaying the inevitable. To get this healthy again, we have to tell the truth. And when we tell people that those jobs are going to come back, that American workers in Ohio really want to make low price t-shirts again, and if we just do enough tariffs on Vietnam, that will happen. We're delaying what needs to happen to really make progress, because those jobs are not coming back. And anyone saying
Mhm.
they are is wrong. But I
Mhm.
do think that we have the ability to have near full employment in our society, but we are not lacking for jobs at this time. We're lacking for workers. It's somewhere between 3 and 4 million prime working age men that have left the workforce. It's 6 or 7 million that are out of the data altogether, but some have retired, and there's different elements that contribute to 2 or 3 million. But yeah, the ones that have left the labor force, that's a major problem. And I think it is highly correlated to other social, spiritual, cultural, moral issues happening in society. And I believe that this will take a long time to fix. But we are going to need more marriable men and more employable men. And when you get more employable men, you get more marriable men.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I've seen that, just pivoting off that data point too. I've seen that data point about the huge difference between men who are single and women who are single. I think the Pew research I saw was 50% of men are single in the younger age cohort, and 1/3 of women.
Mhm.
So that it shows that there's certainly some interesting things happening there. Do you think obviously a big part of your thesis is that it's the employability aspect? Do you think there's other factors as well? You know, I've read a lot about how online dating skews on unfairly for men?
Yeah, there's guys on both sides of the political aisle that have done a lot of really good work here. You know, Jonathan Haidt's talked about this. Scott Galloway, who's a more left-oriented guy, has talked a lot about it. And I'm very sympathetic to the idea that there are cultural issues that are going to end up having to be addressed. That will then, if you solve for one thing, there'll be a positive feedback loop that'll help to start solving for others. And so in the interest of time, it would be difficult to unpack where all of this started, but where
Mm-hmm.
all of it is now is, I think, in a negative feedback loop. That's why I refer to the marryable and employable dilemma. Men who are not employable are usually not marryable, and men who are not marryable are usually not employable. But the opposite becomes true. You know, there's attraction to the opposite sex when a man has the responsibility, the character, ability to provide, the productive capacity. That becomes more attractive to dating partners, and it also then makes them employable, give them more dignity, self worth, contribute to the economy. And so these things feed off each other in a positive way. A lot of the issues, though, unfortunately, are not going to be solved with anything to do with government or public policy. They're just not. You know, we're not going to solve for these issues that are plaguing men living at home until they're 33 years old with tariffs. You know,
Right.
people can debate tariffs, they can debate various elements of economic policy, but they're not going to solve for this issue. This is one that I do believe is fundamentally spiritual. It's a responsibility element. And for men to take responsibility for their own lives, this is going to be requiring more social shame when it doesn't happen. But as long as we want to provide a macro cultural enabling effect, then nothing can get better. And that's the hard part that we're dealing with right now as a society. Too many people are unwilling to say the hard things that, video game playing and recreational drug use, and living at home until you're 33 years old, this stuff, too many people are unwilling to say it's unacceptable. And
Right.
and so that's what's going to be the spark to some change. It will come. It will happen. But we're in a tough period right now in that element.
I remember Charles Murray in his book Coming Apart. His line was preach what you practice.
Yeah.
As for people who are successful like yourself. So you're doing that. You're preaching what you're preaching what you're practicing. But so many people, it's almost indirectly correlated of people who are successful, who have a house in the suburbs, who are living. They want to almost virtue signal and not say these hard truths. Why do you think some of them, especially some men, are afraid to make this a seemingly obvious point?
Well, I think the obvious answer that I'm somewhat sympathetic to, and Charles Murray talked about this a lot, is that at some point we made it a kind of moral prize to non-judgmentalism, that we think there's
Mm-hmm.
something morally superior about not judging things, and yet that does come from the sort of reversed hypocrisy whereby we do not preach what we practice. Those that have successful, fulfilling lives, that have some degree of order to them, stability, economic, prosperity, there's generally a playbook that we know what it is. And the unwillingness of those people to say this is kind of some of the best practices does not mean going to college and partying for 4 years and getting a worthless degree from a mediocre school. It often means trade school. It often means hard work at an entry level position. But it does mean if you're going to have a girlfriend and have a wife, you're going to provide, that you're going to, if you have kids, you're going to care for them. There's certain family values, social values that we've generally long upheld. And when we do these things, when we avoid divorce, when we avoid, some of the alienating behaviors that create a lot of these problems, then I think it's an imperative that we who have enjoyed a good life um, practice that, but also preach it so that it becomes infectious. It becomes a contagious thing that people recognize. Okay, this is a good way to have a contented life. for us to live one way that has resulted in a good life for us and then pretend as if, but you do you, it's okay.
Yeah.
And that we think that there will be no damage done to the psyches of these folks that are in that excessive video game use and whatnot. Now, look, a lot of this stuff too, the social media, there's certain technological trappings, but you still have to answer the question how it's possible people to make ends meet by excessive video games, social media use, drug use, and lack of productive behavior. And that social safety net that is enabling it has got to change. We need to have a social safety net for the truly impoverished, for the truly destitute, where there have been real emergency issues. And the notion of using the disability feature of Social Security as just a broad unemployment substitute, it is impoverishing the souls of these young men, and it needs to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had read in the myth of American inequality that the bottom, tell me if this is correct, the bottom 3 quintiles of earners in the US after transfer payments all essentially make about the same. So there's so little incentive for somebody in that bottom quintile or second quintile to try to move up when that median quintile is just making the same as them and probably working a lot harder.
Yeah, I've read the same, and I think that one of the elements that we have to realize is that when we refer to who's in the first quintile and the third quintile and the fifth quintile, that those wages of quintile 4 and quintile 5 are pretty similar is true. But what is different is that very often who's in quintile 5 at one point can be very different when somebody does go up the ladder into the second quintile later. There's still the capacity for significant mobility. What we have to do is prize mobility, prize people changing their station in life. Sometimes that requires them to geographically move. Sometimes it requires retraining. Sometimes it means recognizing that what I have an economic skill in is no longer prized and I need to go learn a new skill. And we used to have this high prize on high value we'd put on labor dynamism. And that's gone away to some degree. And a lot of people believe, well, the thing I wanted to do that was kind of easy for me here in my backyard, that's gone away. So now I'm going to, check out and so forth. And we need to make it harder for people to do that and easier for people to say, you know what, I wasn't expecting this, but I have to go relocate. I have to go get trained on a new welding certification or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of opportunities out there for those that are looking for them.
David, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and your work?
Dividendcafe.com is where I have a investment writing, macroeconomic commentary. There's a podcast, there's video, but there's all sorts of commentary made available for free there. I also have a podcast called Capital Record, where I'm doing twice a week some sort of discussion, much like you and I have had today, about various elements in the economy and trying to apply a philosophical and moral pretext to it. So the Capital Record podcast and dividendcafe.com are a good way to stay in touch.
David, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. And thank you to all for taking the time to listen. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes drop every Wednesday and Friday. Subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. And we'll be back with a new episode soon.